What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for Black Lightning Season 1, Episode 5, titled, "And Then the Devil Brought the Plague, the Book of Green Light," which is a terrible title. I'm going to actually call it by its previous title, which for some reason, and I don't know why they changed it, from Aches and Pains. I thought that was a much better title, simply for the fact that it's shorter than a full sentence, because "And Then the Devil Brought the Plague, the Book of Green Light" is way too long, and I'm sick of these books. What does that even mean? Why are there books? The Book of Lawanda, twice. The Book of Green Light. I'm pretty sure there's another book coming up. The Book of Thunder. There are too many books, so Pains and Aches would have been a much better title for this episode. Not because it has anything to do with the episode, but because it's less than a full sentence. But let's get into the review. This episode it puts the previous episode to shame in terms of events, because the last episode, as I said in my review for the previous episode, which you could see in the description below and in the top right corner of the video, there were nothing in that episode. Nothing happened. Almost nothing happened. This episode, however, was packed full with things. This was it was a much better episode. This was probably my favorite episode of the season thus far, and I'll tell you why. So first of all, Black Lightning, we see him learning a new ability in this episode, which is flight. I said in a previous video where I was talking about the characters of the show, I said Black Lightning can't fly, and I don't know if he can in the comics, even though he probably can, but I mean he could fly in the show, which is pretty cool. I didn't see it coming. The only problem I have with this, the only issue I have with this, is that it would have been cool to see him like discover it instead of just saying I'm gonna be able to do this, like discovering it on a whim. Instead of what's his name, Gamby, just saying, hey, you could do this, and then he does it. But maybe the problem with this is that maybe the flight is why he gets his headaches, and that is probably how they are going to save on a budget, because I'm betting that flying costs a lot of money, so they could just save budget by saying whenever he flies he gets sort of headaches, so he only flies when he really needs to, which honestly would be a pretty smart way to save the budget on this. There probably is another reason he's getting headaches, though, because they're pretty severe headaches. I mean, he lost a fight to Joey Toledo, who I don't think he's probably a killer or something, like a good one, but he's a normal person, so it's pretty severe headaches. So there is probably another reason he's getting those headaches. But Black Lightning wasn't actually the standout in this episode, and that's because the standouts were Anissa and also Tobias Whale. Those two had much more interesting storylines than Black Lightning. But even though Black Lightning's storyline wasn't bad or anything, it was just those two storylines were much more interesting. Anissa was investigating Alvin Pierce, and we learn a lot of things about this universe. First of all, we learn that there were like 11 or 15 kids with metahuman abilities from the past. I don't know if it was metahumans, but they had enhanced abilities from the past who went missing. I'm guessing, and this is probably like 100% accurate, that Black Lightning was one of them. Jefferson Pierce was one of those kids. Hopefully it would be cool if we see the rest of them. Maybe they could turn out to be some DC characters. That would be a smart way to introduce those characters, and without having to give them origin stories. But this whole storyline with Anissa investigating him, and Alvin Pierce, and this whole thing was really interesting, and it also served to set Anissa up as the superhero that she is going to be in Thunder, and I thought this was a pretty cool way to do it. And she did put on a costume in this episode, and this costume was so much more comic book accurate than the one we're actually getting is. It seems like they're doing that for every character. They did it for Black Lightning. They gave him a really comic book accurate character in the flashbacks and in his old costume, but then his new costume is an updated version of it, but it's actually not better. Thunder is basically the same thing. Her costume now is much more comic book accurate. The hair is like she has the blonde hair, which is probably a wig in the comics as well, but it is a wig here. And then the blue and red costume, it is so much more comic book accurate than the yellow one we're getting. And I actually believe, and I think it actually looks better. So it's actually pretty disappointing that she's getting a new one, but it's also really weird why they keep on doing this. They're giving these characters comic book accurate costumes just to throw them away and give them updated costumes, which the new costumes don't look better, and that's not only because they're not comic book accurate, but also because they're not comic book accurate. This costume, however, was extremely comic book accurate. It's probably a better version of the comic book costume as well. So, moving on from Anissa to Tobias Whale, who had probably the most interesting storyline in this episode, if not, then one of the most interesting, along with Anissa. So this episode, along with the previous episode, it really fleshed out his character. Until the previous episode, he was just a mob boss who tortured, killed, and injured the people who worked for him, which I hate. But in the previous episode, he was a little bit fleshed out with when we met his sister, and they gave him something to do. But this episode took it to a whole nother level. We learned some of his backstory. First of all, we learned that he doesn't age, which takes the whole realistic concept of the show and just throws it out the window, which doesn't bother me at all. It is a superhero show. It does not bother me. The fact that he doesn't age doesn't bother me in the slightest, and I don't know if that's a part of the comics. In fact, I'm going to pause this recording right now and check that. Yeah, I couldn't find anything about this agelessness that he has. Although it's not a superpower, it's like a drug that he's using. Maybe it's green light. It's probably green light. He's probably the only one that could keep it under control. But even though it's not a thing from the comics, it is at least a little interesting, and it makes him a more threatening villain and a more fitting villain for Black Lightning, because until now he was just a regular person, like in terms of abilities. So he wasn't really a match for Black Lightning. But with this agelessness, he probably has like something. It's like Vandal Savage. He's just a regular guy, but he doesn't age. He's immortal, so he has an upper hand on that. But like I said, Tobias Whale, his backstory was fleshed out in this episode. We see his father. His father was torturing him for being an albino and was hurting his sister, and then he kills them. I thought that, first of all, fleshed out as a character really well, and also serves for some pretty not emotional, but pretty intense moments later in the episode where he kills his father. That was done really well, and it's just this episode fleshed out Tobias so much. The only thing I didn't like about Tobias Whale's story in this episode is that it didn't play off the last episode. Last episode we saw him visiting Khalil, telling them about Black Lightning, but this episode doesn't address that at all, which is the only thing I didn't like about Tobias Whale's story. Everything else was done really well. Also, the fact that he knows Gambi and talks to him like they used to be partners is pretty telling onto who killed Alvin Pierce, because in the comics, Tobias Whale had nothing to do with the death of Alvin Pierce. Actually, I don't know if his name was Alvin Pierce, but Jefferson's father. He had nothing to do with the death of Jefferson's father. Gambi was the one who killed him, and then he had a redemption, and Jefferson forgave him, and they started working together in spite of it. But in the comics, Gambi was the one who killed him. So here on the show, they could do the same thing where Gambi was a teenager back then, 40 years ago, and he was working for Tobias Whale, because we learned that Tobias Whale doesn't age. So I'm assuming he was the same exact age he is right now, or he was a grown adult. Gambi was a teenager, so he could have been working for him, and then he was the one who killed him. That's a huge possibility, because it is what they did in the comics, and the fact that Tobias Whale and Gambi are talking to each other like they know each other, and they were, that it's a huge possibility, and I think it would be a pretty cool point of drama for this show, and it would be pretty great drama, and it would make sense if Jefferson was not talking to him for a little bit like they do in the CW shows for just simply lying. But it would make sense if Gambi not only lied about killing his father, but killed his father. I think that would be a great point of drama, and it would make sense considering they did it in the comics, and Gambi knows Tobias Whale, and he would be around the right age to be working for Tobias Whale and to be making a mistake like this as a teenager, maybe even 20 years old. We don't actually know how old Gambi is. Who knows? He might be 60 or 70, but he could have been either a teenager or a 20-something-year-old. It would definitely work. In conclusion, this episode, like I said earlier, puts the previous episode to shame in terms of things that happened. I think that Black Lightning's all three storylines, Black Lightning, Anissa, and also Tobias Whale, were really great. The only one that wasn't great, but it wasn't bad either, was Jennifer one, which I think she probably discovered her powers there because she took on two girls in one fight. I mean, two versus one. She probably discovered her powers there despite her not using any electricity. But other than that, even though that wasn't bad, it was good. Everything else in this episode was really great, which is why I'll give this episode a 9.5 out of 10. But let me know what you thought about the episode in the comments down below and in the poll in the top right corner of the video. And if you missed my previous review, because I did upload it today at the same exact time, click in the top right corner of the video or in the description below. Thanks for watching.